Got it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hi. Alrighty, let's get this started for y'all and the folks watching on YouTube. Welcome to the Commonwealth Club. My name is Melissa Kane. I'm a political analyst, an attorney, and a host of the Get Out the Bet podcast. A few reminders before we get started here. Today's program is being recorded. So we kindly ask that you silence your cell phones for the duration of our program. Also, if you have any questions for Congresswoman Lee, please fill them out on the question cards on your seats, or if you're joining us online, put them in the chat box on YouTube. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our special guest, who, as many of you know, is running to be California's next U.S. Senator. She's been representing California in Congress since 1998. She's the co-chair of the House Democratic Steering and Policy Committee, making her the highest-ranking African-American woman appointed to Democratic Party leadership. In Congress, she's on the Budget Committee and the Appropriations Committee, which oversee all federal government spending, so she's a good friend to have. Please welcome Congresswoman Barbara Lee.
Thank you.
All righty, Congresswoman. We have so much to talk about, but before we get to that, for the folks who live outside of your district and might not be as familiar with you, your personal story, and how you got to be such a long time serving Congresswoman, could you just start with your life and how a woman from Texas ended up running to be California's next senator?
Well, thank you, Melissa, and thank all of you. It's really an honor to be here with you, and thank you for that question, because it's so much a part of how I was born that informs what I do today. My mother, when she was pregnant, she needed a C-section, and the hospital would not admit her because she was Black. And it took a while, and it's a long story about how she finally got into the hospital. But, as unfortunately our history in this country has it, her grandfather, my great-grandfather, was Irish. My great-grandmother worked for an Irish household, and he raped her. And out of that came my grandmother, who looked like she was white. So my grandmother, and this is what happened, she had to tell that hospital, "This is my daughter." Some of you may have seen, I know Paul is here, and he knew my mother. She had green eyes, she was very beautiful, but she was an African-American woman, and they wouldn't let her in. But my grandmother looked like she was white. So they finally let her in after my grandmother said, "This is my daughter." Let her in. She needed a C-section. They would not do anything but left her on a gurney. They would not provide any medical care. They would not tend to her. They did not examine her. They did nothing. Time went on, and my mother became delirious. Then she became unconscious, and she needed the C-section because soon she was going to go into labor. Finally, someone saw her and decided, this is much later, that they had to do something. And they put her on, she was on a gurney, and they rolled her in to the emergency room. And they didn't know what to do because it was too late for the C-section, and she was unconscious, and she was very sick. She was dying. And they decided to deliver this baby girl using forceps, and they pulled me out of my mother's womb. And I had a scar over my eye for years until a few years ago. And I share that story because everyone in El Paso still knows that story about how I almost did not get into this world. My mother almost died in childbirth. And so my fight for women's health and for justice and for the end of discrimination and inequality was from day one when I was born. And now...
You can applaud. It's okay.
From day one. And fast forward to today, Black women, 3 times the death of white women in terms of maternal mortality rates, infant mortality rates. Off the scale, you would think by now, and these are Black women of all economic backgrounds, still dying in childbirth. And so this is a big issue for me personally and for me in this campaign because I know it so well because of my existence that almost didn't happen. So we moved from El Paso. My dad was a military officer. My grandfather was the first African-American letter carrier in El Paso. He spoke fluent Spanish. We grew up in an immigrant community. My dad was in the Black Battalion, the 92nd Battalion in Italy, supporting the Normandy invasion. Of course, the military, when he was there, before I was born, was segregated. He fought in Korea, and he was in Japan. My mother was one of the first 12 students in El Paso that integrated the University of Texas at El Paso. It was Texas Western. Then the NAACP had a lawsuit, and they asked her to be a plaintiff. And so you can look at the historical records and find Mildred Parrish Massey as one of those black girls who integrated the University of Texas. So fast forward. So I came from a family and went to Catholic schools. Schools were segregated. And my family was very determined not to participate in segregation. I mean, I remember drinking out of the water fountain, colored only, the segregated restaurants. My dad tried to take my mother and two sisters to eat at drive-in restaurants, to the theaters, and they would say, "I don't serve," and they'd use the N-word, and I hid my dad in his uniform. So all of that was taking place as a child. So I went to Catholic school because they wanted us to have a good education and not participate in segregation, even though the black school was the best. So the Sisters of Loretta taught me. They taught me a lot. I didn't like them when they were my teachers because they were disciplinarians. I had to take logic. I had to diagram sentences. I mean, it was like, okay, take music, everything. So we moved to California, mainly for the public schools when I got out of the 8th grade. Lo and behold, we thought we were coming to a state where we were free and we could, live as every American deserves to live. Moved to San Fernando and to Pacoima, California, in Southern California, and I wanted to be a cheerleader. And this story is really relevant now. And the criteria for girls, you had to meet this certain criteria to get through this selection process. Well, I didn't look like the girl that could get through this selection process. So I knew the NAACP. I was on work study then. I went to Mr. Mance, who was head of the NAACP, and I said, "Can you help me? I really want to be a cheerleader, and I'll never be able to because I don't meet the criteria." So bottom line, the NAACP looked at the conditions and the parameters and the framework in which I had brought this to them. They said, "Yeah, you're right. Black girls will never make it, nor any girl of color." So they helped me organize the student body. They went to the administration, and I mean, to tell you, there was a lot of pushback because they wanted the selection process to stay intact. But we finally got the campus to agree to having an election for cheerleaders. Now, mind you, I was 15. And so the election was held. I tried out in front of the student body, and guess what? I won. I won. That was my first election at age 15, my very first election. But also a Japanese American girl won, a Latina won. So that disrupted that system that shut out girls of color. And I was able to do that. And that's how I've been working as an elected official since day one, trying to make this country and this state do right by everybody. And that's part of who I am. So fast forward to this election now, remember the cheerleading story. This is something that I've talked about this publicly. Sometimes when I do, people kind of shudder, but it's a fact. Many people come up to me and say, "Barbara, we know you. You'd be a great senator. We know you've delivered for your district and for California. You're experienced, all these great things. But Adam Schiff just looks like a senator." Okay, so remember that cheerleading story. Remember, I won that cheerleading story, and I'm going to win this race because I'm going to make sure that we dismantle all these unfortunate rules on campaign finance where, that's still a barrier for black women and women in general. So, same story.
Oh, wow. And so around this time, you were very young, though, also when you got married and had started having children. Can you talk a little bit about how that has informed your experience as well?
Yeah. I got married when I was 16. Nobody knew it. It was a secret. And a lot happened during that time. I ended up, and I was the cheerleader, but, I was pregnant. And I talked about this publicly, which was really hard for me to do. Had an abortion. I just recently, last year, talked about it when the Texas laws started, the restrictive laws started coming down. It was just too much for me to handle because my mother and I made that decision that it would be best for myself to have an abortion. And that's the way it should be now. It's the decision that a human being, a person makes with whomever she wants to talk with, but it's nobody else's business. So I never talked about it because it was nobody else's business. But she sent me to Mexico, to Juarez, to her friend who lived in El Paso, and I'll never forget this. It was illegal. This was before Roe. It was illegal in California. It was illegal in Texas. It was illegal in Mexico. And so I was terrified because also the most common reason and form of death for black women at that point was septic abortions. Okay, so understand this. I'm terrified. My first plane ride back to El Paso. My mother's friend, God bless her soul, who was a Latina, she just passed away last year, took me across the border to a back alley. It was about 10:30 at night, and I knew I could be arrested. Just like now, these states are criminalizing people who have abortions and the providers. And I remember that moment. I remember that back alley. I remember the office, the clinic. It was a clinic. It was a back alley clinic. And I survived, but a lot of black women didn't. But I was terrified, just like women are now, because I knew going across the border, I could be arrested. I knew leaving the airport from El Paso, coming back to California, I could be arrested. I knew landing in California, I could be arrested because it was illegal. And so I co-chair the pro-choice caucus, and one of the issues for me is reproductive freedom and reproductive justice, because we have got to make sure that we put into federal law, codify into law, the Women's Health Protection Act, so that we can have abortion access as part of the law of the land. We've got to do that.
We're going to come back to your story here in just a minute, but I do want to dig into the abortion law question, because there is some criticism around why haven't the Democrats, when they've had control of all three branches of government, gone ahead and done this ahead of time, but sort of before the Dobbs decision came down? Do you feel like the Democrats waited too long, or do you feel like it really wasn't necessary until now? What's your take on the
Quite
time?
frankly, nobody believed it could happen until a few years ago, and then we started. This is the first time a constitutional right has been taken away. Who thought we would have to fight the same fights that we fought 50 years ago? Nobody. But we saw this coming a few years ago, and so we got ready. And a couple of things I want to mention. One is the Hyde Amendment. I worked for our beloved Ron Dellums for many years. And Henry Hyde, you remember Ron, he was a great statesman. And I was a staffer, a chief of staff, when Henry Hyde instituted the Hyde Amendment. And he said that he wanted to make sure that no woman had access to abortions, but if he couldn't do it for everyone, because this was after Roe, then he wanted to make sure low-income women couldn't access abortion care by restricting Medicaid for the use of abortions. And so the Hyde Amendment has been in the appropriations bill since the 70s. Understanding that, when I was elected to Congress, I made it my mission to repeal the Hyde Amendment. No Democrat would touch that. It was like, Barbara, don't talk about that. The Hyde Amendment is a law that, these low-income women, these black, brown women, they're not a political force. Don't touch that. So I said, okay. So as I do, I organized, and the All Above All Coalition. These were some phenomenal, primarily young people of color, men and women. It was multiracial, multi-generational, but young people led this, and they did the organizing around the country. And they came back and they asked me to introduce it. I said, well, let's look at what's taking place. with regard to the Democrats. And we weren't quite there yet in terms of the polling data. So I said, okay, let's take one more year and do it. So they went out there and they polled, they educated the public about how the Hyde Amendment was discriminatory, and in fact brought it back. And I went to our leadership then, and it was finally like, oh, Barbara, okay, leave us alone. Okay, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? So I said, I want to repeal the Hyde Amendment. And they said, oh my God. But finally they saw the polling data, and they saw that people did not believe we should discriminate against women because they were low income. And I introduced the EACH Act. Everyone thought it would maybe have 2 or 3 co-sponsors, but I introduced it with 30 co-sponsors, including the chair of the Judiciary Committee. Now I have about 165 co-sponsors. I talked to the president about it, and he now says he would sign a law to repeal the Hyde Amendment. And so we built this support over the years, but it's been these outside groups who have really educated the public. And also, finally, I'll just say on the Hyde Amendment, again, seeing this coming, this is just part of what we saw coming. The appropriations bills are the bills that carry the Hyde Amendment, and that is just like automatic. Every year, Hyde Amendment, okay, Hyde Amendment. Hyde. So finally, when we were in the majority and when our great speaker, Nancy Pelosi, was speaker, we said, okay, it's time. So we were able to take the Hyde Amendment out of the appropriations bills. So it passed twice without the Hyde Amendment in it. Got it to the Senate, of course, they put it back in. So we're still working at it, but we're building it, and when I get to the Senate, we're going to take care of that also and get that done. So we've been anticipating this, but not the Dobbs decision as it went down.
And so to get back to your story, I found an old Chronicle article about your piano career, about your talent. One of the things you learned begrudgingly from the sisters was how to play piano, and that became a source of scholarships and even a European tour. Can you talk about that?
Well, I actually took piano lessons from Mrs. Nixon, who had a daughter who had Down syndrome. Her husband was one of the leaders in the civil rights movement, Dr. L.A. Nixon. She came to our house every Saturday, and I was the only one who would practice the piano. My sister said, forget it. But my grandfather, it was like I wanted to please my grandfather. So I learned how to play the piano, mainly at home with Mrs. Nixon. But I learned a lot about Down syndrome, being with Annie every week, too. And I'm really, Down syndrome is another issue that I deal with. But, she taught me a lot. But I learned the piano, and I was an accomplished pianist. When I graduated from high school, of course, I played at graduation. I made a record, and I won the Rotary Club Music Award and the Bank of America Music Award. And when our beloved, the late Michael Morgan, found out, he wanted me to, and my mother was still alive, and that was my only regret is she kept saying, I still have the same piano I had when I was 3 years old. Barbara, get back to your piano. I want to hear you play that piano. And so she and Michael, because she loved going to the symphony, and she and Michael conspired that they were going to get me to at least practice with Michael to do one opening night at the Oakland Symphony. So I saw Michael, and he kept asking me, he said, look, I've been walking around with this music in the trunk of my car for 5 years now. Aren't you ready for me to come by? And I never did it. But one day, but I love music. And I was very, very good. I was very good.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you still play at all, or you're oh, hey.
The piano's still closed. It's where it was when my mother passed away 8 years ago. It's still there. One day, same piano, but no, I don't have time. But I love playing. I could play all kinds of music, but and I love music, and I love art, and I love decorating, I love color. That side of me, I have an artsy side.
Well, you got to find a way to get that out.
We got to.
I imagine Congress doesn't allow much of that.
Oh, please. But that's why you need that other part of life. You need that other.
Well, then soon thereafter you became a mom, and sort of got to experience, some really difficult times economically.
Yeah. After I graduated from high school, I went to England. My former husband was in the Air Force, and so I actually lived in England in Banbury for 2 years. And when I lived in England, that's when I became clear about who I was. And I was not a minority in this country, in the world. I was part of the majority of the world that looked like me. I met people from Africa, the Caribbean, the Middle East, from everywhere. And all of a sudden, it's like, the minority mentality was gone. That was very empowering to be there. And I was in London every weekend, and my son was born in South Rice of Tony Lee. It was quite a 2 years. And my former husband, he was in the Air Force. His serial number 193-18963. I still remember that. And came back to Southern California after 2 years in England, had another child, Craig. And then we moved up here to San Francisco. My dad was lieutenant colonel by then, about to retire after a few years. He was head of the communications department at the Presidio. Mm-hmm. And my former husband was a techie. And he hired him up here as a civilian. And so we lived at the Presidio. Oh. And then we moved to Geneva Towers. I lived there.
What?
Yeah. And then he got a job at IBM, and we moved down to San Jose. And and then after that, things happened, and he was a really good father, good husband. He's passed away recently, last year actually. And then I moved back to San Francisco, lived at 250 Page Street. But then another relationship that was pretty bad happened. Thank God my kids, their grandmother took care of them during, and again, I know what domestic violence is all about. I carried the first Violence Against Women Act in California when I was in the state legislature, and I understand that very well. That's why I work so hard for women in terms of violence prevention, because it's very dangerous, it's serious, and we have to stop the battering. And I know that very well. And so, that was not the kid's daddy, though. That was not the kid's daddy.
Oh, okay. Sorry, that wasn't clear.
No, that was somebody else.
That I read. But you were able to get your education.
Yep.
Quickly.
Ended up getting out of that relationship. Went to Mills College. Applied for public assistance, food stamps, Medi-Cal. And I raised those two little boys. And actually, why another issue, housing is such a big deal for me, because then I had no money. I wanted to get a good education, and I wanted to take care of my kids, and I was very active in the community, and I wanted to buy a house. And there was a program, I think it was the 235 program that HUD had, which allowed a person like myself to buy a house. And it was $19,475 in Maxwell Park. Then that was a lot of money, but it helped me. Whatever the program was, helped with down payment, helped with my payments, and that one home that I purchased in terms of the equity helped me move forward, take care of my kids, send them to college, start a small business, and just keep moving forward. Now, the affordability crisis, young people, and so many young people support me in this campaign, they can't even understand and visualize what buying a house means, because the cost of living is so expensive here, and the affordability crisis. I mean, the average income in my district for an African American family of four is probably less than $50,000, and the average cost of a house is close to $1 million, and that's in Oakland. So we've got to deal with housing in a big way, and I am in this election and this campaign. But that's part of my history, is what happened when I was at Mills College and how I was able to buy that house and meet Shirley Chisholm, the first African-American woman elected to Congress, and become involved in her campaign. She was the first African-American, the first woman to run for the presidency, and she was one of, yes, give Shirley Chisholm. And so the rest is history.
So after that, you worked for Ron Dellums, who you've explained, and then eventually you ran for the Assembly in 1990, then the State Senate in 1996, and then Congress in 1998. And I do want to stop for just a minute to allow you to talk a little bit about your experience in state government prior to going to Congress, because I know it's something it's harder to follow. Sometimes Sacramento can seem very opaque.
Well, when I decided to run, it wasn't Barbara Lee deciding to run. It was when Elihu Harris decided to run for mayor, and there were several people in the community who told me, because by then I had a business, and I was doing a lot of fundraising for Ron also, but it was after you work for Ron Dellums, why would you want to run for anything, because you've worked for the best. And so, and Paul knows Supervisor John George. He and a minister, Reverend Larqueath, they kept calling me and said, you've got to run for this seat. We need a progressive black woman. There's never been an African-American woman north of Los Angeles in the California Assembly or Senate until I ran. Never, ever. And then until recently with Mia Bonta, since I left, and we still don't have an African-American woman or man in the Senate from Northern California. So John George kept calling me, and I said, no, I've got a business, my mental health background, I'm trying to, I had a mental health center, community mental health center, and the whole bit. And so finally, they circled the wagons, and John George, I'll never forget him. Some of you may have known him, but he was crossing the street. I'll never forget. And he says, you've got to run for the seat. We need you. The next day he died. Yeah. So it was kind of, I had to do it. But it was kind of like, oh my goodness. But now I'm really happy I did, because when I was elected to the California Assembly, Pete Wilson was the governor. And if you look at my record in the Assembly and Senate, I got probably more bills signed into law than any other freshman member. And no one thought I could do it who came in the early 90s. No one thought I could do it because I was so progressive. And they said a right-wing governor like Pete Wilson will never work with you. Well, bottom line is he signed over 67 of my bills into law, some major bills, and he really respected me and I respected him, but we went at it. But the secret, and now as I look back, which I still do now, you have to, as a progressive, you start out, you're not tinkering around the edges. You start out saying, this is the right thing to do. This is going to affect people in the way that their lives are going to be made better. This is how we ensure development and diplomacy rather than military first option. I mean, you have to stake out the turf, because especially now with the MAGA extremists in Congress, well, Pete Wilson was pretty out there. So he was out there, right? So he started here, I started there. And we had the ability to negotiate. If I started here, in a very kind of moderate place, then there's nowhere to go but to the right. And so we had a relationship where I did the children's health program. I set up the Alameda Health Alliance. And it took me 2 or 3 years with Gray, who was Lieutenant Gray Davis, Lieutenant Governor, but I enhanced penalties for those blocking access to abortion clinics. And it took a long time, but he finally signed it into law. I had the California School Hate Crimes Bill, which barred discrimination against the LGBTQ community and kids. I think he vetoed it 2 times, and I figured out how to get it done, and I got it done by organizing some people that he knew. And so on the 3rd time, Pete Wilson signed that into law. And so so it was quite challenging, but that helped me get ready for what I'm doing in Congress now, in the House.
And so you ran in 1998 for Congress, and what was the biggest surprise? What's the biggest difference between DC, House of Representatives, and Sacramento?
Well,
aside from like the food and
when I was in the California Senate, I went in as chair of a committee. I chaired the Housing and Land Use Committee of the state Senate, like that. Being 40 out of, being 1 out of 40 was pretty cool.
Oh yeah, that's true.
and still, California Senate districts are larger. You have more constituents in the state Senate than members of Congress have. So it was quite interesting, and I was able to do a heck of a lot. And so I go to Congress thinking I'm gonna chair a committee, and then I said, oh wait a minute, I should remember I worked for Ryan, I know good and well. So it was like, why can't I get this bill passed? It's like, come on, and my staff was kind of like, chill out, you got time. But I went and I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee, as well as then was the Banking, now it's Financial Services Committee, and so it was really a shock for me to have to, like, I won't say wait my turn, but have to understand patience a little bit more and how to negotiate and how amendments are so important. You may not get your entire bill passed, but if you take sections of your bill, like I did during COVID, and put it into the Recovery Act, you may be as impactful. And so I had to learn very quickly how to get results if I didn't get my full bill passed. And also I had to learn, and I learned this very quickly because of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, that I had to do something as it relates to HIV and AIDS, both here in America and throughout the planet, especially in Africa. And then, President Clinton was president, so I introduced a bill, the Global AIDS and Tuberculosis Relief Act. And it was really hard to get support for it, but I finally got support, and that established the Global Fund. You hear the Global Fund now. Well, that was my bill that established that.
Wow.
And he signed it into law.
Wow.
So fast forward now, George Bush is elected. So I'm thinking of Pete Wilson. How do I do this? So I go to the White House with the Black Caucus when he's elected. And Eddie Bernice Johnson, who was the chair of the caucus, she says, okay, Barbara, we each had what we wanted to talk about. I said, I want to talk to him about HIV and AIDS and all the people dying in America and throughout the world. And everybody looked at me, okay, And I wore a beaded button. And so when it was my turn, he listened. And Colin Powell was there and Condoleezza Rice. And he says, work with her. Let's see what we can do. And after the meeting, we stood in line to get a photo. And he looked at this beaded button and wanted to know what it was. I took it off and gave it to him. I said, this was made, Mr. President, by women in South Africa who are raising money for treatment for people who are dying. And I saw President Bush a few months ago, and we talked kind of about that moment. But bottom line is, I introduced the bill. It's called PEPFAR, the President Emergency Program for Emergency Rates. You know PEPFAR? Well, that was my legislation. And I had to negotiate with him. I had to negotiate with Henry Hyde, who was chair of the committee that I was on. It came through Foreign Affairs. And I had to deal with Chris Smith, some of the real anti-abortion folks. I mean, it was a hard negotiation. And we're in the middle of this again to reauthorize it. And I'm dealing with some of the same dynamics, although on my side are Senator Frist and President Bush trying to get the MAGAs like Chuck, Roy to do that. And they won't, but I think we're going to get it done anyway. I have a way to figure it out. We're going to get it done.
Between us. How are we getting this?
We're going to get it.
Now you are, I think for many people, most famous for a bill you didn't vote for, which was the authorization for military use of force in Iraq. You were the single no vote.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about that now that we're sort of down the road. I don't know if you've ever had an I told you so party or ever had that, moment of back with those folks or sort of how you feel about that and how your colleagues feel about that.
Yeah.
Have any of them come to you and said, I wish I'd voted no with you or things like that?
First person and this was a blank check, 60 words that should have never passed 3 days after the horrific attack. It was set the stage for forever war. It removed the Congress from any kind we're missing in action on any kind of authorization to use force anywhere in the world because it gave over to our authority, which is the people's voice. So, having said that, a lot of death threats, it was bad. Still stuff bubbles up. It was bad. People called me a traitor. Rudy Giuliano in the Veterans Day parade walked with my opponent with a stick with me smiling, World Trade Towers burning in the background, saying Barbara Lee hates America. I'm watching TV and seeing all this, and all the haters come out after me. I mean, it was really bad. And I realized then that people don't really understand that essence to our democracy is the right, part of the essence of our democracy is the right to dissent. That's, you don't have to go along to get along, and you don't have to go along if you think something is wrong. And I thought it was wrong. So fast forward, I've been trying to repeal that for 20 years. Now, Chip Roy and I, the MAGA extremist Republicans, we're working together to repeal it. And I have all, yeah, for their own reasons. But I have, let me tell you, the Democrats now, and that's my, I feel good because the public has weighed in over the years and said this is wrong. We spent over $1 trillion. We sent our brave troops to war, and my dad was the first one to call me and tell me that was the right vote. The military officer, Colonel Tutt. And so it's just been like hard work to educate people because the public's been there. And so now I got it last year, the repeal of the Iraq authorization, over to the Senate, and Senator Kaine picked it up. We got it off the Senate floor with 10 Republicans. So it's back now in the House because we are in a new Congress. And so we're working right now, like I say, with Chip Roy and some of the really extreme Republicans, and we're putting our coalition together to get it passed again in the House. The president issued, which was really, for me, full circle, he issued a statement of administration policy. It's called a SAP. When I was taking it to the floor last year, which means we support it. The White House wants to sign this into law, so members vote for it. So it was really kind of great.
Oh, that's wonderful. So aside from that, and you've talked about some of the legislation that you've pushed through, is there an amendment or a law that you can think of that is really sort of your proudest moment of like sort of an affirmative thing that you've sponsored and gotten passed that you regard as kind of your signature most proud?
Well, I think all my global HIV/AIDS legislation's
That's pretty great.
We've saved over 25 million lives, and it's been bipartisan over the years, and I've had to hold it all together.
Oh,
because
wow.
only maybe 25% of members of Congress are serving now who were there then. So I've had to go one by one by one. Senator Frist has had to go one by one by one. So President Bush has had to go one by one by one. So I think that, but I've done quite a bit on legislation, the COVID Community Care Act, for example. I mean, we were able, and I'm on the Appropriations Committee, and I was able to get millions of dollars targeted, which was a big fight, targeted to communities of color and communities where the pandemic was the greatest. And there was a reluctance for a while in certain communities, in Black communities especially, to trust the messages, to trust what was taking place because of systemic racism in the healthcare system. We know that. You look at my birth and what happened then. So we understand. I look at all the experiments that have been done. Mm. And so we were leery. But I said, no, we're going to have resources in this Recovery Act to hire trusted messengers in Black and brown communities and on Native reservations where people are dying disproportionately, and we've got to save their lives. So however we do it, we're going to do it. So I was able to get millions of dollars through the COVID community. My bill, I took parts of it and put it into the Recovery Act and saved lots of lives doing that. And that's just very recent.
Wow.
And we expanded community clinics, and I was able to target the money everywhere where we needed to target it. So
wow.
I was pleased about that. Nobody knows that, but now you guys do. But yeah, so that was cool. I do a lot, but nobody knows it.
Well, that brings us to the Senate race. I do want to get into that a bit, but I want to start by throwing you a huge softball and just asking why you. Give us your pitch for why you should be the next senator for the state of California.
Well, I think that my experience, my ability to negotiate, legislate, appropriate, my understanding of the world in which we live. I mean, I have a large national security perspective and foreign policy perspective and how it relates to our domestic priorities. Mm. And I want to fill a lot of the gaps that are in the Senate. First, the representation matters. You have 0 Black women in the Senate. Now, I am experienced, I'm progressive, I've delivered for my district, I've delivered for California. Why not? I mean, it's like to fill in the gaps. Since 1789, and this is something that a lot of people don't know. Since 1789, There have been 2 African-American women serving a total of 10 years. 1789 was when the first House and Senate went into session. That's Senator Carol Moseley Braun and Vice President Kamala Harris, a total of 10 years. And so the perspective and the lens and the experience is needed in the Senate. And I believe that I have that, and I can really bring this perspective and this strength and the ability to educate the public and to be one of 100 who can sound the alarm, if things are going south. And really take that experience as a progressive Black woman into the Senate, because that's a gap that has got to be filled.
So Governor Newsom has said that if the current Senator Feinstein steps down, that he will appoint a Black woman to that spot. Have you been in communication at all with anyone from his office about potentially being that appointee if it were to happen?
No, I haven't. Last year, of course, during the whole process, and Alex is a good friend of mine, so he's a great senator too. And there was a move, though, to make sure that either myself or Mayor Bass were appointed, but we supported Alex Padilla. And so the governor said that he would, if he had the opportunity, he would appoint an African-American woman. But I'm running in this race, and I'm running to win, and that's what I'm doing. And I don't want to interfere in his process or whatever decision, if he had to make that decision, what he would do. I mean, so
okay,
that's
so no text messages, no.
Hey. Look, I don't have time. I'm raising money and putting my campaign together and doing what I need to do to get people to get to know me so they'll vote for me.
So I want to talk about your campaign for a minute. So it looks like we don't have many polls. I think I only saw 3 polls that are sort of public, although if you have any numbers you'd like to share, please do. The most recent PPIC poll put you basically pretty much a tie with Katie Porter and Adam Schiff as well. Although, and I do want to take a minute to the Congresswoman's horn here for a second, because despite having not raised nearly as much money as them, the Congresswoman has the endorsements of Mayor London Breed, even Ro Khanna, who was rumored to maybe running in this race, but seems to have endorsed you as well, and including Fiona Ma. I'm trying to think of other Bay Area luminaries who have stepped up. Rob Bonta, Malia Cohen, and just a real litany of important folks who have already come out and support of you. Also, I looked in your donor list and I saw a couple of folks. I saw Michael Tubbs, former mayor of Stockton, who's an important leader. Also, I have to say this, Marta Kaufman. If y'all are Friends fans, like Marta Kaufman and David Crane, like that's on every episode. She created Friends. And she is supporting Barbara Lee. And also, finally, I saved the best for last, Jackson Browne. Google it, kids. It's important. The musician also has donated to your campaign. So there is this extraordinary level of support and, again, great polling as far as we can tell for your campaign. And as someone who has been running and very successfully, winning elections for office for so long, how have you been able to create a statewide or, even national presence?
Melissa, I have, and I'm very proud, there's 5 of the 8 statewide officers, constitutional officers, supporting me. I have many mayors, Mayor Bass in Los Angeles, and actually the mayor of Irvine, which is where one of my opponents live, endorsed me. I had a fundraiser in her district. I have quite a bit of support in Orange County. And for me, this is about putting people together, having a coalition. It's a people-powered movement. And these elected officials who've endorsed me, they're recognized as leaders. And they are helping me not only raise money, but they're helping me put together the voters that I need to win. And we have a clear path to victory. And no one says it's going to be easy. But I'm not raising as much money as my opponents. We have got to get to public financing of campaigns, please. We've got to overturn Citizens United. I'm telling you. And so I raised money and I've raised money for the party. Let me tell you, in leadership, the DCCC dues. for other candidates, especially for women and women of color. I've been raising money over and over and over again, giving it away so we could build our party and be in the majority. And so now Barbara Lee is running.
Give
and
back.
People are supporting me. And of course, it's coming, and we're going to raise enough money to win. It won't be what my opponents raised, but Karen Bass, $9 million. Caruso, $100 million. Guess who's mayor of Los Angeles? Mayor Karen Bass. So it's how you relate to people, how you put it together, and all the polls show that if people don't know me, once they get to know me, our internal polls track the external polls. Once they hear my experience, who I am, what I've done, what I intend to do, and especially young people, the Gen Zers, and have the support of the San Diego Young Democrats. I have an army of young people supporting me, and they tell me, they say, we know you, and you've been out there on climate change and on all these issues for us. And they know I'm not running in this election, in this campaign for me, I'm running for them. And they trust me. And all the polls show that the numbers triple when you poll young people. And so we're putting it together. It's a different kind of campaign, but it's going to be a winning campaign. And I hope you all will support me. Actually.
Okay, so I've got here.
You can check my website, barbaraleeforca.com. Okay, they always remind me, barbaraleeforca.com.
Was Barbara Lee taken? Because that would be weird.
It was Barbara Lee for Senate was taken. There was a bunch of stuff going on. It was, which wasn't nice.
Don't go there.
Should be exposed, but so it's Barbara Lee for CA.
That makes sense. What is, I've got some audience questions here. What's the best piece of professional advice that you have received, and who was it from?
From my mother, my late mother. And it was, be yourself. Don't be phony. Fight hard, not only for yourself, but for everybody who needs your help. Yeah.
Wow.
And it was simple. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And she told me, over and over again that I'm here for a purpose. She wanted me to slow down. She'd be upset with me gearing up even more so. But she was a woman who constantly helped me out. She helped me in my first campaign. My mother registered people to vote in nightclubs and bars, her and my sister in Oakland. They brought in people into my campaign who are my voters, nobody else's. And my mother was brilliant.
That is brilliant. I mean, who's going to say no? I don't care who you are. If you come up to me and say, my kid is running for office, all right.
That's what she did.
I have to sign.
Yeah. So it was a sense of justice that she, always, imparted to me, but also be careful. She was worried about me all the time. Be careful, watch your back. She knew all the threats, and she knew what was taking place, and she always was worried.
Moms, the best. What is the most challenging issue facing Democrats in this upcoming election?
The cult of the MAGA extremist Republicans who believe that Donald Trump is above the law. And what has happened now with the Republican Party, unfortunately, is that because of its leader, it's become fairly lawless, and you see what's taking place now. And that's a challenge, to get people to understand that who he is and how he wants to destroy our democracy. And we can just see what his Supreme Court appointees have done, and you can see what he is doing day after day and what he did during his administration. We haven't even built up our embassies around the world. I mean, he's close to Putin. He wants to be a leader that's a non-democratic, autocratic leader. And that's a real danger. And we have to be careful, and we have to vote. And I'm going to tell you, when Hillary won the popular vote, remember that? She won the popular vote. was about 80,000 votes that she needed, and we would not be where we are today. And so the challenge we have is to make sure that people understand that they have to vote this time because so much is at stake, and our democracy is key to that. And so that's the challenge, and not giving up. So many people, the challenge, are hopeless because they see what has happened and they don't think that the government works for them anymore. And so it's like, I'm not going to vote. Let them take it over. And that's dangerous and worries me. But we're not going to let that happen.
And you even have a lawsuit against against President Trump that you're pursuing. You want to tell the audience about?
Oh yeah, before the January 6th committee, the NAACP decided to file a lawsuit and ask me to be a plaintiff in it because I was on the floor of Congress on January 6th. And it was terrifying. I almost didn't get out of there. And so the NAACP decided that this was time, again, before the January 6th committee, to bring forth a lawsuit against Donald Trump, the Proud Boys, and the Oath Keepers. And Giuliani was part of them, but that was thrown out in the lower court. And so Benny Thompson was the lead plaintiff, but when he became chair in probably February or March of the January 6th committee, he had to step down, and I was appointed lead plaintiff in that lawsuit. And the lawsuit, the basic tenets of the lawsuit is no, Donald Trump does not have immunity for what he did on January 6th, that he is not above the law, and that their injunctive relief we're seeking because we do not want this to happen again. This was a threat to our democracy. It was an attempted coup, and they almost did it. So we want to make sure they're held accountable, and there are damages that have to be paid because people were harmed during that period. And so we got through the first district court, and of course Donald Trump filed an appeal. We're in the appeals court now. It's a civil suit, so it has nothing to do with the criminal case or all these indictments, but it's a civil suit. So we're waiting to see if we move forward with the case to the next court.
But you did win at the district level.
Yeah, we won at the district level, yeah, and then they appealed it, and so it's in the appeals court now.
Well, I have to ask you this, and I hate to because you're such a nice person, but you are in politics, so you're tough too. So I'll go ahead and ask. This is an audience question as well. As a voter, I'm concerned about term limits and age limits. You are 77. Dianne Feinstein's 90. What do you make of questions of term limits and age limits and people who might say, hey, we wanted to get somebody even younger into the Senate?
And look, it's no secret my age. But what I think and what I tell people, and I'm really proud of young people especially, because they understand how experience matters at this point. You need somebody who's going to fight and who can deliver on day one, and that's Barbara Lee. And we're at that point in our history where people, and of course age is a factor, it's going to be a lot of issues or factors, but we have to be forthright with the voters and let them make their own decisions. But I think right now, in this moment, you need somebody who's experienced, who's been there, who knows how to fight, who knows how to protect our democracy, who knows how to deliver for California, and who knows how to make lives better for people, and who can see people that other candidates don't see. I mean, 20 million people out of the 40 million in California are one paycheck away from poverty, and I understand those issues. So the issues are important, the experience is important. Term limits for voters, and they'll make their own decision, but hopefully they'll understand how important that is. Secondly, on term limits, I don't support term limits for elected officials because in our democracy, people have the right to elect who they want. Even Lauren Boebert or Marjorie Taylor Greene, I mean...
Really?
Really?
I'm kidding.
Really? But I'm just saying, this is a democracy, and that's fundamental. So term limits take away a person's personal vote if they want to vote for someone who's termed out. I mean, I think the election process determines when people should leave office, and people don't need to be hampered by not electing who they want to elect because of some term limit based on age, term limits, or whatever it is. I mean, if they want to elect Marjorie Taylor Greene, then that's how democracy works. But for Supreme Court judges and justices and for appointed officials, term limits. We see how corrupt the Supreme Court has become. There should not be lifetime appointments for appointed officials. And I believe, well, now I've called for Clarence Thomas to resign. I was the first one who called for that. You know? The Supreme Court is corrupt by corporations. I mean, they're bought and sold by corporations now, and you just look at their decisions. So we have to have this code of ethics, which we're working on now for right now. But I think we need to expand the Supreme Court. I've been one who supported legislation to expand it. What the number is, the lawyers have to decide that. But I think I'm, by profession, my background is psychology, mental health, psychiatric social work, so I understand. But the lawyers will decide what it should be in terms of how many. But I really think it should be expanded because the world is different. The country's changed now, and the Constitution doesn't stipulate how many Supreme Court justices there should be. So I think we should go back to the drawing board and look at that and expand the court. And we definitely need to have term limits for Supreme Court judges, appointed officials.
All right. Who would you like to see in the House seat that you would leave open? Who are you endorsing for your replacement?
I have not endorsed for my replacement. There's some great candidates who are running, and I know one of them personally who's got a record, a public record, and we'll see where that goes. But I think that you have to find somebody who is progressive, who has been in office, who you can determine by what they've done, what they will do in the future. And of course, I know Lateefah Simon very well, and she's running, and she is a great candidate. The close of filing is, I think, in December, so we'll see if anyone else jumps in. But I think my district has some specific criteria. It's a very enlightened district, like San Francisco is, and people know who they want and the type of representative they want.
Are you nervous at all that the type of leader that your district wants is not the type of leader the state might go for? Do you know what I mean? Are you concerned about maybe appealing to voters outside of the enlightened?
Well, you will not believe the support I have in the Central Valley, for example. I am the only Democrat on the Agriculture Committee of the Appropriations Committee. And I was in Modesto, Merced, Atwater, Tulare, Poplar, Fresno, Bakersfield, you name it. And I have a lot of support there. Food insecurity is rampant in the Central Valley. Poverty rates are off the scale in the breadbasket of America, really. So I've led on the Healthy Food Financing Initiative. I brought in resources for food deserts, for SNAP benefits. So they know me in the Central Valley. Not that I'm not going to say I'm going to win in the Central Valley, but I'll take a large chunk. Dolores Huerta is helping me. Cesar Chavez's grandson is helping. I have a lot of support there. And Bernie Sanders won the Central Valley. And members of our revolution are helping me in this race, big time. So I told you I have a lot of support in Anaheim and in Orange County. And California is a progressive state. It's multiracial. We have a good coalition together, and there are pockets of California which are pretty conservative. But I'm not going to campaign. And how you use your resources to target to make sure you get your voters out to the polls. I know where my voters are, and I have to make sure I get them out. And so I have in the Riverside and San Bernardino, the mayor of Riverside has endorsed me. I had a fundraiser and a community event there last week. All over the Inland Empire, plenty of support. I hope you all go to my website. You'll see the broad base of support because people know when they meet me or if they learn about me, they know I really see them and that I want to make their lives better. And I've lived a lot of the experiences that many Californians have lived, and I want their lives to be better, and they know that.
Excellent. Well, you got a plan.
Yeah.
Are members of Congress as weird privately as they are publicly? Because, you watch and you go, you can't really, but I don't know.
Okay, I'm going to give you one story. I'm not going to mention his name, but he's a MAGA extremist Republican. And we were sitting on the floor together. Democrats sit on this side, Republicans over there. We were sitting kind of in the middle working on something. And he had the nerve to say to me, well, we've got a bunch of crazies over there on our side. If I told you the name of this person, you would say, oh, my goodness. I was like, oh, boy.
Blink if it's Matt Gaetz. Just blink. Okay.
Close. But I'm just saying, and I was the teller. When the speaker is elected, Democrats appoint 2 tellers, Republicans appoint 2 tellers. So I was one of the tellers the Democrats appointed, and Joe Morelli out of New York. We sat there through 15 ballots and had a chance to check everything out. And it is like bizarre. and what the sad part and the scary part is, we still don't know what the deals are that they cut with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Bo Baird and all of the extremists. But we're seeing now, and being on the Appropriations Committee, I'm very clear that they want to shut the government down. And I think that was part of the deal, quite frankly. And so it's really, Democrats are fighting hard. This is a time we've had to fight so hard just to maintain the funding levels, for example, from last year and the year before, because we've delivered a lot. The infrastructure bill, the CHIPS legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, all the COVID recovery. I mean, we've created jobs. The economic situation with cost of living is still too high, but it's coming. People are still hurting, but there are ways and strategies and legislation we have that we're fighting to make sure that the cost of living is reduced and that we deal with inflation. Biden has been great. And the House under Nancy Pelosi and Democrats, we delivered. And so it's important that people really know that, and we keep repeating that. It's Democrats that delivered, and the Republicans show up and cut the ribbons as if they voted for the bills, and they don't. They don't vote for any of them.
I saw on Twitter, there's a Twitter rumor, and you can, you don't have to, answer this directly if you don't want to. But there's a Twitter rumor that Nancy Pelosi is backing Adam Schiff, and I won't go into the reasons why. People, I don't know, it's Twitter or X or whatever the hell. But is that your sense of things, or are you looking forward to her support? Are you?
Oh no, she told me early before she even came public. Support him. Everybody has a right to support who they want, and she's supporting Adam Schiff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
This is politics.
It ain't basket weaving.
And she's still the greatest speaker ever. I mean, so I have no.
I still remember, so when I interviewed Jackie Spear with her exit interview, she told like the greatest story about, there's this speaker's chamber, there's like a meeting room, I'm sure you've been in there, this sort of small room, almost like maybe the size of this stage, that the speakers all, sort of use their private room. And before she left and handed over the gavel to Kevin McCarthy, she had put I think it was like Susan B. Anthony and like some bunch of women She had a mural of like great women in history. But
oh yes.
Like, here you go, Kevin.
Oh yes. Very smart. She knows what she's doing.
I was like, all right. Okay, so. Yeah, so someone wants you to talk about your foreign policy experience, because I think it's interesting that, it's so hard to find people who are consistent. But you voted against the Iraq War Authorization Bill. You've also voted to get the U.S. troops out of Syria and also out of Afghanistan. And so been pretty consistent on your views about, where the U.S. should be involved. And most recently, I think, against the sharing or giving of cluster bombs to troops in Ukraine. So can you talk a little bit about that, how that those experiences and that perspective would bear on your Senate career?
Yeah, and I think, people are always asking me to contrast myself with other candidates. And I think this is one area where it's pretty clear, the contrast, because I have a long history of being involved in national security and foreign policy issues, as well as domestic policy. And a couple of things that are important. First of all, I believe that the Pentagon has too much money. They're $886 billion, right? And I have constantly tried to reduce the defense budget to a rational defense budget. And every year I lead the effort to cut it by at least $100 billion. Now we've learned, and this is very clear, $150 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse only. 150 billion. So you can just take that off. And so my part of what I have fought for, like Ron Dellums did, is to have a defense budget that is rational, that ensures our national security, takes care of our troops, maintains our global leadership, the whole 9 yards. You don't need $886 billion to do that. I chaired, when we were in the majority, the subcommittee. It's like the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Appropriations Committee. First time an African American ever chaired that. State and foreign operations. Development diplomacy was my mandate under my jurisdiction. I'm the ranking member now. And what my whole goal has been is to rebalance our national security strategy. You know, we have development, the three legs of the stool: development, diplomacy, defense. My budget, and this was an increase that I fought for, was just about $60 billion, and defense was like 800 and some billion, okay? And so it's like, come on. And so I fought to, and I got more. It was less than $60 billion before I chaired it. But you can see my framework and my perspective on national security and foreign policy has got to be about global peace and security. And we've got to lead with that. And the military officers always tell me, look, we need money to stop wars and to prevent war, to keep wars from breaking out. Mm-hmm. So we need more in the development accounts and in the diplomatic accounts and in I've been to Sudan many times, in the humanitarian accounts. I've been to Eastern Europe, Georgia, Ukraine. I've been to Lithuania, Poland, you name it. And I've had a lot of experience dealing with the world in which we live. And I'm very clear how fragile our democracy is. I'm very clear on that because I know what's taking place in the world with regard to the movements. I understand what white supremacy is. It's not just a U.S. deal. It's an international phenomenon. And in fact, I know that we have got to get this defense budget under control so that we can have resources to lead on global peace and security strategies. And so that's where I'm coming from, and I've done a heck of a lot in countries that never would have had a dime had I not fought for development assistance, global health, education, women's health, the global gag rule, getting rid of that, and all of the efforts that really put America as a country that the rest of the world wants to deal with, because we know China is everywhere. And China is everywhere in Africa and the Caribbean. Why? The U.S. is missing in action. And so I try to get the U.S. government, USAID, in our country to invest more in these countries because that's how you deal with China. It's not like you have a stick. You can't force them out, but you can do the American thing, if you will. But we've got a long way to go. I've been the representative to the United Nations since President Obama was in, and it was so funny because the speaker nominates, the president appoints the UN representative from the Democratic caucus and the Republican caucus. So I've been the one. And Speaker Pelosi, we had a press conference. She says, I'm going to tell you a secret. She says, I nominated her to be the UN representative, but Donald Trump appointed her. Don't tell anybody. So bottom line is, again, contrast me with my opponents. I know the United Nations system. I fought to make sure the UN associations are funded and that we fund the UN because they trying to dismantle the United Nations, the U.S. is, and trying to cut back on their dues. And so this is a reason why I need to be in the Senate, because I understand how foreign policy and national security works. As a black African-American woman who's progressive, I know how to navigate this country and the world in which we live.
And a Trump appointee. I had
Don't tell anybody.
No idea. All right. So final question here. We'll try to end on a happy note here. What is the most rewarding part of your job?
These young people, I'm telling you, I founded Martin Luther King Jr. Freedom Center in Oakland in the 90s. And these are young people who were living on the edge. And and the program is phenomenal. We've had young people come through the Martin Luther King Freedom Center, and they are lawyers now. 5 or 6 of them come with me every year with John Lewis had the Civil Rights Pilgrims. And so they would select 5 or 6 to come with me to go to Selma, Montgomery, Birmingham. And I've seen these young people. Now they're going to Indian reservations and they're doing humanitarian work, civic education. And so these young people at the Martin Luther King Freedom Center and all these other groups that I work with, young people, give me a lot of hope. And I'm telling you all, people get sort of depressed right now after COVID and down and don't see hope. But talk to young people, engage with young people, because all they want is you to give them a little bit of hope. And they are unbelievable. They came to me a couple of years ago, some California youth in high school, and said, look, we're worried this planet is burning. We won't have a world when we grow up. Would you introduce a bill that we want to write with you to require the climate emergency to be taught in schools? I said, sure. So we sat down and they wrote that bill. And they came to Washington and we introduced it with all these high school students. And they're building the co-sponsorship for members of Congress to sign on, and how can members say no? So we're pushing the climate agenda with our young people. So I'm just saying, young people, they give me a lot of hope, and that's why they know I'm running for them, not for me, for this Senate seat, because they are the ones that we have to see as our leaders, really, now. And we have to empower them to be leaders, and we have to let them move. And I've had Justin Jones, I'll end with this. You know Justin, one of the Tennessee Three, right? In Tennessee, who was expelled. Well, Justin was my intern, okay? Now, how good can it get? Okay, so that's what makes me happy and hopeful.
All right, on that note, many thanks to Congresswoman Barbara Lee. All right, if you'd like to support the Commonwealth Club's efforts in making virtual and in-person programming possible, please visit www.commonwealthclub.org. I'm Melissa Kane. Thanks for coming out tonight. We will see you next time. Good night.